At InDigital, we know that public safety professionals hold themselves to a high standard. In fact, standard doesn't do it justice. In over 25 years working alongside you, carrying millions of calls over our IP networks, your dedication has inspired us. That's why our ESI Net goes beyond industry standards, not only i3 compliant, but designed to adapt to future development for a network you can count on when it matters most. Learn more at indigital.net.
Rapid Deploy believes that every public safety agency, regardless of size, should have access to the data they need when it matters most. That's why, since 2016, our mission has been to reduce emergency response times and improve public safety. We are the industry's only integrated emergency response platform. Our web-based cloud platform includes analytics, mapping, dispatch, and mobile apps, purpose-built for 911 in the 21st century. Visit www.rapiddeploy.com to learn how we enable effective, efficient, data-driven emergency response.
If Within the Trenches has ever taught you something, open your eyes to what it is like to be a 911 dispatcher, or has inspired you to become one, then help support us and join our Patreon. Get exclusive bonus content, one-of-a-kind swag, discounts on merchandise, ad-free early access to new episodes, and much more. To join, please visit patreon.com/WTT podcast. And if you're an industry partner, we have something for you as well. And now, for the show.
This is Jordan, and you're listening to the Code 7 Podcast Network.
Warning. This episode contains the 3 A's of podcasting: adult content, adult language, and awesomeness. You've been warned.
Welcome to Within the Trenches, true stories from the 911 dispatchers who live them.
Hey, what's going on? This is Ricardo with the Code 7 Podcast Network, and this is going to be Within the Trenches, true stories from the 911 dispatchers who live them. This episode is sponsored by InDigital as well as Rapid Deploy, and it's February 15th. It's the week after the Be the Difference conference, and it was amazing. There were so many people who ended up joining in. I believe we were just over 2,500 attendees going into the beginning of the conference. And over those 3 days, we ended with about 3,400. Such an excellent time. So many good speakers, such good education. And it was all over social media. So thank you all so very much. Again, that was the Be the Difference Conference 2021 virtual. And it was the first one put on by the Denise Amber Lee Foundation, also powered by Within the Trenches Media. It was an honor to be able to help them out with that conference. And people are still registering now. It is open. You can register for the rest of the time being. It's always going to be there. All of those sessions, you can watch them on demand anytime you want. So again, make sure to check out the Be the Difference conference. And then Dare to Be Great 3 is coming in June. I know it's a long ways away, but it's going to go fast. And it's just, thank you all so very much. Also a big shout out to patrons. I wouldn't be able to do everything that I do if it wasn't for you, and also all of you who watch, listen, share, and support. So thank you so very much. There's a lot more to come, and I am very excited for this guest today. I was reading over her book, and there is a lot of amazing information in here and stuff that, as I'm reading it, I kept thinking, yep, that's me. Yep, that's what happened to me. And I didn't understand all of it at first, but over the years, I started getting just really finding out more about what I was dealing with while I was in dispatch, and a lot of this hits home in this book. So I am excited to have her on, and my guest today is Dr. Stephanie Conn, and she's a psychologist at First Responder Psychology and author of Increasing Resilience in Police and Emergency Personnel. Hey there.
Hi, Ricardo. How are you?
I am doing good. How are you doing?
Good. Snowed in and loving it.
I was just about to say, so right right before we started here, you were talking about the weather and stuff, and it's not as bad here as it is there, it sounds like, but we have a storm that's going to be coming in as well, and I think it feels like -2 here. I don't know how cold it is there.
I think it's in the maybe 30, 31, something like that. It's not as bad as what it's been.
Oh, well, then that's good. Hopefully things get better. Because you were talking about how, the power was out there for a little bit. Things
Hmm.
seem to be back now. Let's hope that it continues to stay that way and you stay warm.
Yeah. Well,
So,
I'm plenty warm right now.
yeah. Well, again, thank you so much for being on. I think we had talked about this a while back, and
Mhm.
we didn't get a chance to do it then, and then we had something that we had planned out. I had a death in the family, so we had to
Mhm.
reschedule. And then, but here we are. And again, I am just excited because there's so much information and so many things that you do that will completely help the entire audience. I believe that listens to this show. And so let's start out with a little history about you. How did you get into public safety to begin with? Because just kind of looking over your LinkedIn profile and website and just some of the summary there, you come from a public safety background, correct?
Yes. Yeah, my dad was an officer for almost 40 years in a small town where the police department was in one building, the dispatch was nested within the police department, and then across the alley was the fire department. And so in this small town, I grew up around public safety personnel, and so it was an easy choice for me when I was getting my bachelor's degree in psychology to go into public safety as a dispatcher, to begin as a dispatcher,
Mhm.
because I had such high respect for what they did. I thought what they did was interesting. As a child, I knew probably way too much about the ins and outs of the work because my dad would sometimes have briefings and debriefings
Mhm.
at the kitchen table, and I was the first bedroom in the hallway, so I could actually hear a fair amount of what was being talked about from a very young age.
Oh, wow. Okay, so about how old were you then? Like 6, 7, like around there, or 10, or?
Oh, no, no, no. My dad was a cop before I was even born. And
Oh,
so he would
okay.
do
So,
shift work. And yeah, so he was a cop when I came into this world. And and my parents told me stories that I wouldn't go to sleep as an infant until my dad came home from shift work, and then he could put me to sleep. And so I think even an infant, there was a when's dad coming home kind of piece that was always there. And then I kind of laugh when I tell people when my dad got on a drug task force, he was on dad duty, he would take me out to do surveillance or meet with an undercover officer when he had to meet with them off location or that kind of business. And so I was doing my first ride-alongs as a child. I didn't know what I was doing. I thought I was just hanging out with dad, but I was
right.
doing ride-alongs pretty early.
Oh man, that's pretty awesome. I've had people come on and they've talked about how they come from a law enforcement family and from a very young age they were involved. A friend of mine told me a story about him dispatching as a kid. His father was the chief of police, and their calls came into his house. That's how long ago it
Wow.
was, but he remembers dispatching as a kid and sending his dad out and stuff. He goes, so
Uh-huh.
it stuck with me, it stayed with me, and it was something that I wanted to do. Now, as from an early age, then did you? I guess you kind of found that you had that connection. Then it was that interesting. You always wanted to be involved.
Yeah, I had as much as any teenage, especially when you got in teenage years, any teenage girl who's a cop's daughter in a small town has conflict with her father. Um, there was still a respect for what he did, a very high regard for what he did and for what his dispatchers did, and the his officers and even the firefighters across the alley. Um, just because it just seemed admirable and it just seemed uh, meaningful in so many ways. And so I would read my dad's textbooks, college textbooks. I was kind of a nerd. And I was like, this is pretty cool, right? This
Mhm.
is something that I could actually see myself doing. So again, when I was doing my bachelor's in psychology, I was like, I saw an opening come up for an agency, and I thought this would be a good, for a dispatch position, dispatch 911. I was like, this would be a good place to get started right now at this point in my education, so that I could start, getting experience in this line of work. And it just happened to be that the chief of that department was friends with my dad through the Chiefs Association, and that isn't why I got the job or any of that kind of business. But it didn't hurt that I had some familiarity with her. So.
Mm-hmm. So, okay, so you have all of this early exposure, and you go to school first, right? You go to school, and then it was when you got into dispatch then?
I was about midway through, let's see, I'm going to date myself here. I started in dispatch in 96, and I got my first bachelor's in 98. So I was about halfway through with my bachelor's in psychology, and I was taking, it's kind of strange, when I was a dispatcher, I was taking courses on serial homicide and behavioral crime scene analysis and forensics and that kind of stuff. And so I was taking a lot of courses that detectives at the neighboring agency were also in, and because I had an interest in that intersection between criminal justice and psychology, always did. And so I was spending time doing ride-alongs with the death investigator when I was a dispatcher. And so just again, kind of talking about the intersections of the two fields of work.
Do you think that was that a reason that kind of pushed you into psychology there as well? Maybe younger, like growing up, you're hearing these stories, right? Just like you were saying in the beginning, the debriefings and everything that you're a part of, is some of that kind of trigger, like I see that there's these debriefings, these stories, maybe even seeing, your father or some of his coworkers going through or dealing with certain calls, that kind of push you towards, psychology, but also, having that bridge there with law enforcement?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how much of a push it was. I know it was always in the background. I know as a young girl, I had nightmares, like pretty chronic nightmares, pretty severe sleep disorder as a child, and where I would sleepwalk or go up and down the hallway, and I could actually unlock doors, and my dad would find me out in the yard. So they had to put extra locks up on the chains that I couldn't reach. And when I would have nightmares and would go in my dad's room, I had to wake him up almost like with a ruler, where I could actually kind of touch him from a distance, because if I got up close, you don't stand over. I didn't stand over my dad to wake him up. I'll just tell you that.
Yeah.
So I think there was it was in part because I was trying to heal thyself. So I was actually researching, why am I having nightmares? What do nightmares mean? And this kind of stuff.
Okay.
And so I was trying to heal thyself, but then I also was aware of my dad's heightened startle response, and you got to sit here and look out there, and you don't do this and don't do that. I think there was also some element of it relating to him, but I think it's hard to tease it apart, because I've never known myself to not be interested in psychology. And I mean, from a very young age, when I started reading about dreams, I had to ride my bike to the library, so I was quite young. So,
man, so you had this for a while, which is awesome, because in everything that you've gotten into, you've had this experience going up, and I'm a firm believer that let me give an example. So my certain calls that I've taken, I feel like some of those calls were kind of meant for me, because I've dealt with a similar situation to begin with. I had that experience. So someone else who might not have that experience wouldn't be able to respond to it the same way as myself. So, for you, going into, psychology, I love that you had already, but because you've got that connection with law enforcement, it just, I feel like you would be able to do it a lot better than someone that doesn't have that experience. Does that make sense? Like, you've got all that experience and you're combining it, so you're able to relate it to a lot more situations that are going on in law enforcement.
Yeah, and I hear that often from clients who seek treatment from me, or who are being I'm working with them currently is that they state, I want someone I don't have to explain things to. I don't want to have to explain the vocabulary. I don't want to have to explain why it matters or what it means to, a dispatcher, or to a cop or firefighter, what have you. And so there's just kind of that foundation of understanding that that I think facilitates the work, because then we can actually get onto the work. We don't have to do we don't have to do the background. We don't have to do the homework. I mean, we still have to do some homework, right? Every person's experience is different. Every person is different, but there's a foundation from which we can build. Whereas a person doesn't have this kind of familiarity, they can do the homework and they can get there, but it's just a lot more ground to have to cover to get to that starting point.
Yeah. So you're halfway through this program that your degree and all. You go into dispatch. What is that like for you? Because you already have some of that experience and all. But did you do any sit-alongs? You talked about the ride-alongs with law enforcement, but did you do any sit-alongs in dispatch?
Well, no, because I did as a kid. My dad, when I would go visit my dad or would be hanging out with him, he would take me into dispatch, and I would stand in dispatch while she was dispatching. And so I learned, it's kind of funny, the things you learn and you don't realize. You learn when they start talking or someone starts talking on the radio, you shut up, you don't talk, right? And so so I learned really young what they were doing, what it was like, how they had to be like an octopus, this foot pedal and that thing and this and that, how they had to do all this stuff at once with 8 legs. And so I didn't end up doing any sit-alongs because I kind of felt like I had enough knowledge about that just from being around it for, gosh, at that point, 20 years, because I was 22, 23 when I got into dispatching. I had been around it my entire life.
Man. So then, okay, so you've got all of that experience then, and you're familiar, but you're walking in there and you're seeing everyone, like you said, like an octopus. Everyone's got, they're running it. And I like to ask this to kind of compare, because for myself, so when I first started out dispatching, it was a small police department, and it was only one dispatcher on for 8 hours. But when I moved back home to Southwest Michigan, I was working for the county that I grew up in, and this was a central dispatch, 3 people minimum, and the call volume way higher than where I was at. And I walk in and I see someone with those, the 8, everything going, doing all this stuff and eating at the same time. And I'm, how am I going to do this? So it was, a little overwhelming at first, but what was that like for you walking in? And now it's going to be your turn, and you're going to be the one who's starting to train and get into this.
It was exciting. I mean, it really was, because I was eager to do it. And I think when you are excited and eager to do something, that's a huge help. Like any new task you're learning, it's a bit intimidating, especially just the criticality of it, right? You're not getting somebody's order right in the drive-through. This can, in some instances, be life and death. And so there's a heaviness that comes with that, but an equal amount of excitement, an equal amount of enthusiasm. And I was in a small department where it was one dispatcher on at a time, and you were dispatch, you were for police, fire, ambulance, you were 911, and you were, in some cases, when the front lobby was closed, if someone came in the lobby and wanted to post somebody's bail money or whatever, you were that person. And someone hit a button in the jail, you were making a note they need toilet paper in cell 3. I mean, like, it was it was crazy, the amount to think, and if someone forgot the code to get in the back door of the building, you were buzzing them in too, right? So or the Sally Porter, so you were building control, front desk, dispatch, jail, all that kind of stuff. Oftentimes there was only one. I would be the only female on duty, and they would need a prisoner searched in the jail. So they'd come sit in dispatch, and I'd go in the jail and search the prisoner for them. And so it was the jack of all kind of trades. But it was, the good news in some respects is that each experience I had, being the daughter of a cop, being a dispatcher, being a cop, each experience helped the next one be easier to navigate, because I knew that I needed to understand geography. I knew I needed to understand directionality. I knew I needed to understand a lot of things. And I used to watch my dad's training videos that he did for bank employees that were, he trained them how to be good witnesses in a robbery. And so I watched those videos as kids. So I knew to hang on details and to capture details. And so it was a challenge, but I was up for the challenge.
Man, I see, just listening to you, I miss dispatch. I don't miss some like the crazy hours and some of the politics
No.
and stuff, but it was a lot of fun, but
Mhm.
I didn't have a lot of that experience and everything that you had going into it. When I went in green. Like the only experience I had was Rescue 911 with William
Mhm.
Shatner. That's all I had. And
Oh boy.
and it was one of my favorite shows, but of
Yeah.
course it's a show. I mean, a lot
Yeah.
of the stuff they had there was real and all, but that's all I had to go off of. And I remember going in the first night and my trainer's showing me everything. He takes a phone call and then he turns and looks at me and he goes, "Okay, now it's your turn." And I just remember looking at him and thinking, are you for real?" And he goes, "Yeah, I'm serious. The only way you're going to learn how to do this is by getting in there and doing it." So my first phone call that ever came in, if I remember correctly, it was like a missed dial. So it wasn't anything, of
Mhm.
substance. But a couple of weeks later, I ended up taking a 40-hour beginners, dispatcher course and stuff. But that first night, I I was I was in shock, I guess, a little bit because I didn't think
Mhm.
it was just that. And he's like, "Yeah, you got to jump in. That's how you're going to do it."
Mhm.
Do you remember any of your earlier calls from back when you were in dispatch?
Um, I remember I remember we had a person that used to call and abuse us constantly.
Hmm.
She was severely mentally ill, and so she thought all the female officers, were sleeping with her husband. So she would call and make threats and all this kind of stuff. And then we had somebody that was Republic of Texas, which is kind of an anti-government person that would call and harass us and that kind of stuff. And then so I would remember kind of faintly those things, but I remember the radio traffic where one of our officers was having a medical condition, like a heart issue, on a call. And that stood out for me because I had a personal connection to him. And I remember just my hand shaking. I was like, "Please let him be okay. Please let him be okay," as I'm sending
Hmm.
the medics out for him. That's what stood out for me, that. And then just being shocked when people called 911 to ask me for the phone number for something else. And I absolutely refused to give it to them. Even if I knew
Hmm.
it, I refused to give it to them because I was studying psychology, and I was like, "What you would reinforce continues. I won't do it. I will not. I'm training the public not to use 911 as 411."
Right. Yeah, and that's something too that the general public doesn't understand that actually comes in. I would have conversations with people. Let's just, for example, whenever I would go get my hair cut, of course, the person cutting my hair wants to, start some small talk so that it's not
Yeah.
awkward, them just doing their thing, which I find it relaxing actually when there's nothing going on, but they're just cutting my hair. To me, that's relaxing. But
Yeah.
not everybody's the same. So I would say, the majority of the calls that come in are not emergencies. And they would say,
Yeah.
"Really?" And I would say, "Yeah." People call in sometimes to ask about parade times and fireworks times. And they would say, "Well, why did they do that?" And I would say, "I don't know."
Yeah.
I'm, I'm not sure. I guess that's their emergency at the time. But we would always tell the people to call the non-emergency line, and we would give them the number, and they would say, "Well, can't you just do it right now?" And I would say, "You have no. I have another call that's on hold that is a high priority." And
Mm-hmm.
they would either hang up or they would hold on, and eventually they would hang up because there's so many different calls. 911
Mm-hmm.
doesn't stop, and we have
Mm-mm.
to deal with those as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I
Um,
actually got written up for telling someone who just kept power calling me, "This isn't Burger King. You can't have it your way." And I got written up for that because I was just like, it was one of those nights where it was on fire out there. Like everything was
mhm.
crazy, and I had all 6 911 lines ringing. I had radio traffic on every channel. back channels, secondary talk channels, all this kind of stuff. They're asking me to run all these returns and whatnot because it was just hopping. And this person was wanting a information about a person that was in the jail. And I said, I will get back to you. I am not able to do that right now. And they just said, you can't not do this because I said so. And I said, and that's when I said, it's not Burger King. You can't have it your way. And it's funny because my supervisor asked me a couple of days later, do you remember a call the other night? And I was like, yeah, just, could you tell me what you said? And I said, exactly. Like, but let's not play this game. I know you know what I said because everything's recorded, right? Let's not play the game. I said what I said because I was playing octopus and I had eight arms and I had 16 things needing my attention. So
yeah. Yeah, it's like, just give me the write-up. If that's what you're going to do, let's, why are you prolonging it? Let's not beat around the bush. Let's just do this.
I'm honest. I'll tell you what I said. I'll take my licks. Not my finest moment.
Right. Yeah, exactly. But also I have found, or I found when I was dispatching, is if I was real with someone like that, sometimes it would help them understand. There would be people who would call in and they would be yelling and swearing at me. And the one thing I would say all the time when stuff would happen is, sir or ma'am or whichever, the officer's just not right around the corner waiting for something to happen. They're coming from like 3 townships away. And then a lot of the times it would calm them down and say, oh, okay, I apologize. I'm like, no, it's fine. I just want you to know that they're not just right there. Like, they're coming from a long ways away to get to you and have cleared from another emergency to get to you. Well, why is there not more officers working? Like, I don't know that. Like, that's not, I'm sorry, I'm not sure. But so
above my pay grade.
yeah. yeah, exactly. It's like they're getting there as fast as they can. And, they would say, okay, well, all right, well, I'm still here. I'm like, I know, so am I. I'm right here on the phone with you. So working in that area though, did you find that it was harder in a way, only in the sense that, when you're working in an area that you live in or that you grew up in, you are going to eventually take phone calls from people that you know?
Well, I didn't do it in the area that I grew up in.
Okay.
It was no. The chief was friends with my dad, but she was or that city was at least an hour and 15 minutes away from where I grew up. So it's a huge difference. No, but there is, but to your point, if it had been in the community that I lived in, it's significantly worse. I mean, we know it's significantly worse, but no, I was in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex at that point, kind of what they call the mid-cities between Dallas and Fort Worth. And so, and I grew up about an hour west of Fort Worth. So, well,
that is good then. But those 2 areas, so how big was the area that you covered, and do you remember how many people worked at the same time, or was it just you?
I was the only dispatcher working. Once I was out of training, I was the only one, unless we just like it hit the fan, like we had bad weather or something else, and we were able to call a second one in because we just had way too much going on. Ask someone to come in. You know how it goes. Can you come in 3 hours early for your shift because I'm getting hammered here. And so, and typically two officers, one sergeant. And sometimes just one officer, one sergeant. And then I don't know how many folks were on the fire. I guess minimum of 8, maybe 10. Yeah, probably 10. Wow. Because of so so it was a pretty small, but it was nested, like I said, in the middle of all the chaos. And so, which was kind of interesting because sometimes a drunk driver would be driving through town, and by the time you could get your people down out to the highway to get them, they're in the next one. And then so I'm transferring calls to the next city and so forth, trying to anticipate, well, how fast is this person going? I'm going to go ahead and skip a city, go to the next one.
Right. Yeah, because by the time you send it over, and depending on if that center is busy as well, by the time they hang it up, they're already in the next one. You're like, okay, hold on, we got to transfer it again.
You got to be
going back and forth.
Where's this drunk going? All right.
Right. And you mentioned earlier that one of the things that stuck with you was kind of that radio traffic. It was an officer that you knew, and through doing this podcast, a lot of people, and I didn't realize that we did this in dispatch, but they would say, when an incident like that happens and there's a lot of people out there, you start listening to voices so that you
Hmm.
can narrow down exactly who it is who is either, hurt or, whatever it is that's going on.
Hmm.
And it was something that really, I guess I didn't realize, like I said, I didn't realize it was something we were doing, but we would do the same thing.
Hmm.
And, when you get attached, it's like this brother and sisterhood, you know all these people and you get so close. And, it could be also someone that doesn't usually get rattled easily, but as soon as you hear their voice that cracks or that's rattled,
Hmm.
it gets even more overwhelming
Hmm.
in there, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. And I did know these people personally. I mean, there was a while. I mean, my husband and I, he worked for
Mhm.
that department. We were not dating at the time, but I quite liked him and cared about him. And so it was very difficult knowing he's on the other side of the radio. And if I'm being completely honest, um, I dated a firefighter there. And so there were
Mhm.
times, you know, uh, before my husband and I got together, of course, there were times when, he would be out on something and I'm listening. So I had more of a relationship, to the person on the other side of the radio than normal, right? Which
Right.
I know a lot. I work with a lot of dispatchers now, and I'm the advisor to a dispatch center, a clinical advisor to a dispatch center here locally. And there's many dispatchers there who have husbands and wives on the other side of the radio, right?
Yeah, and so working in dispatch, a couple of people that were on my team, I would ask them, "How do you deal with that? Like, how do you do it?" And they would say, "What do you mean?" And I would say, "Well, I've worked with you several times when there is a code that goes out where it's all emergency traffic stays on the main channel and all the other goes to the other channel, and adrenaline is pumped, the everything is heightened to 1,000%, and we're focused and doing what we're supposed to be doing. But how does that work for you? Because you know that your husband or wife is going out there and this incident is going on, and we know all the information that's going on as they're
Mm-hmm.
going there and they're
Yep.
about to get into it." And I remember one of them telling me, "I know that he knows his job and that I
Mm-hmm.
have enough trust in him to do what he needs to do, and that he knows what he needs to do, and he's got all of his crew there with him. So I just
Mm-hmm.
have faith in that."
Yeah.
And we continue doing what we have to do to make sure that their job is it's that much more smooth. I'm like, "Oh, yeah, I guess that makes sense." I don't know. I guess I was thinking too much into it, but it's not something that I've experienced. So it was hard for me to understand.
Yeah. Well, it's a balancing act because if you're not in the line of work and you know or find out that your significant other went out to a really hot call or is dealing with a hot call, it can sometimes be harder for you that you're not in the field because you don't understand the training, you don't understand all the checks and balances and all the other things that people do to try to keep themselves safe. So in some respects, even though you don't hear it live, going and happening and this kind of stuff, um, which is kind of the strain on dispatchers,
Mhm.
you don't also have the benefit or the protective factor of understanding all the things that are in place to keep people safe. And so, yeah, because I have certainly known people that felt worse for hearing details, and then others that were offset by the comfort of knowing the procedures.
Yeah.
And then others that came unraveled and said, "I don't even want to hear it. I can't," like spouses, I can't even hear it. I don't even want to know about it. And you're like, you need to kind of know about it, but you also need to understand, that it doesn't equal something really bad all the time.
Yeah, that's why I love the job. There was just so much learning and understanding, and especially when you're working with everyone out in the field, in even afterwards, hanging out with them, you understand how people think and some of the things that they do, and it makes it easier for everyone
Mm-hmm.
involved.
Mm-hmm.
Um, how how long were you dispatching, I guess, before you ended up switching over to becoming a police officer as well?
3 years.
3 years.
Yeah, I did 3 years at the same department, and
Mhm.
then I became an officer at Fort Worth Police, a much larger agency. And some of the people that I had gone to the crime scene school with, or crime scene classes with rather, were detectives there, and I had some contacts there. And so, yeah. So, and I did that for 9 years.
Oh, man. What was what was your test like in the beginning when you were making that switch over? I ask because, and I know I've mentioned this on the podcast before, but it's funny. I at one point when I was working in Florida, our records department, there was one person that worked there. Her husband was a state trooper, and he kept telling me, I can help you get in if this is something you'd really want to get into. And I was like, I'm not sure. And then I thought, well, what the hell? I'll go ahead and try it. I'll do the testing. And I went in for the physical, and they probably still talk about me now. I passed it. I passed it just fine. But there's a portion of it where you have to pull a dummy that's 100 pounds.
Mhm.
And I remember I was pulling and pulling and pulling, and I got a cramp in my leg, and I fell back. And when I fell back, oh God, that's such a dumbass. When I fell back, my shoe flew up in the air. I completed. I got up and I completed it, and then I
Yeah.
ran the whole thing back without my one shoe. And I remember I finished, and they're like, time. They're like, you passed. I was like, oh, thank God. And when I left, someone threw me my shoe. My sock is all muddy and everything. But when I left, I remember one of the sergeants coming up, and he goes, Martinez. And I was like, yeah, yes, sir. Yes, sir. And I ran over there, and he goes, you got a lot of heart, kid. He goes, but you need to eat more bananas. I was like, thank you, sir. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
So what was your testing like then? Did you have like that physical portion as
Yeah.
well?
Oh yeah. Yeah. And it's kind of the story that almost wasn't, because when I was a dispatcher, I mean, it's a sedentary job, but I was an avid weightlifter, had taken weightlifting in college. And I was doing all, the weightlifting and running and all that kind of stuff in preparation for the academy when I was a dispatcher. And I tore the meniscus in my knee and found out I was going to have surgery the week I turned in my notice, right after I turned in my notice that I was going to leave as a dispatch to become an officer. I went to see the doctor, and he said, you need surgery, like now. And so I had to go back and tell Fort Worth. I said, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I've just realized I'm going to need knee surgery. I'm not going to, can I delay to the next class? And they said, no, we'll just replace you. And I was like, wait, what? And they're like, no, you're just a number, is what I was told.
Oh,
and because they thought that I hid the injury from them. They didn't realize that I was doing all this working out, really trying to make sure I was up to snuff in the academy. And my chief, when I told her, I said, hey, I'm so sorry. I know I've given a notice that I actually need to stay. And by the way, I'm going to need a couple of days off for knee surgery. And, I don't know what to do. And I'm like panicked. And she goes, this is bullshit. She said, this is absolute bullshit, what they're saying to you. She said, you did that preparing to be the best you could in your job. And she made a call to their chief and said, this is a person that you really need to give a second chance, because she didn't hide this injury. She didn't do this. Like, she wouldn't have turned in her notice to us and put herself in that position. And they said, she goes to the next round. She goes to the next class. And so when I went to the academy, I had just started being weight bearing like a week or two before that. So that was a lot of fun trying to do that. And but yeah, I made it.
Man, yeah. You made it, and you did it for 9 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's pretty awesome. Now, I guess so. You go through your 9 years.
Yeah.
Was it maybe in the middle of that time, or was it more towards the end? Like, when was it really, I guess, that you decided, you're really going to make this transition out and do what it is that you're doing now?
Yeah, that didn't come till the very end. So I was in patrol for about 3.5, 4 years. I became a detective in the gang unit, did that for about 3 years. No, 4 years. Getting old now. And then, and I was on the peer support. I became a member of the peer support team. And we had one of my coworkers was killed in the line of duty. And right after Hank was killed in the line of duty, the peer support team approached me and asked me to become a part of the team because I was, trying to support people during that process already. And I was teaching a lot of courses that related to mental health and all that kind of stuff anyway. And so I became a part of the peer support team. So then almost a year later, Dwayne, another coworker, was killed in the line of duty. And between Hank's death and Dwayne's death, we had a changing of the guard from a police psychologist to a city psychologist. So the city psychologist didn't know much about police, fire, dispatch, anything like that. She was just the psychologist for the city. Mm-hmm. No experience with it. And so when she was doing the crisis mobilization briefing for Dwayne's death, she's standing at the front of the room of all us teary-eyed officers. I'm standing there just kind of watching the crowd of people, and people are like, who's this person in our house talking about our fallen brother, right? And so she asked me to step up to the front of the room and kind of take over the crisis mobilization briefing, which I did, which was one of the most gut-wrenching things I've had to do, was sit and talk about the details, and that's what you do in a crisis mobilization briefing, is you give information so people don't go seek it out through the rumor mill or what have you. Mm-hmm. And so as I'm standing up there talking about that, it was shortly after that I had people ask me, hey, could you talk with me and my wife about our problems? Could you talk about this? Could you talk about that? Could you support me with this? And I was just like, no, you actually need to go to a counselor that's qualified, that has the licensure. I'm a peer supporter, and so I'm here to support, but I'm actually here to facilitate your connection to someone else. And I remember one instance where a guy was so adamant he wouldn't talk to a counselor because he wanted to talk to someone that understood the job, that he slid $100 bill into an envelope or into the back of a pledge coin and gave it to me. He goes, oh, I picked up your mail at the office today. And I was like, why are you picking up my mail? And it was his way of sneaking payment in for counseling. Yeah. And I saw it. I said, what the hell do you think you're doing? And he goes, we don't want to talk to anybody else. We want to talk to you. And I was like, I am not qualified. Do you get this? I am not qualified to help you. You deserve more than I'm able to offer. And I thought, if this is how desperate people are for getting people to, who understand the job to help them, I'll start taking counseling classes. And that's what I did. And so I started taking counseling classes at the university. I'd taken my psychology and my Spanish degree in, and that just coincidentally coincided with my husband and I. We had planned to relocate to Vancouver, British Columbia, and we were both going to re-up as officers there. We honeymooned there, we vacationed there. We thought it might be a nice change of pace, better weather than Texas, whatnot. And so we moved to Vancouver, British Columbia, and I signed up for a counseling school there, was starting the process to re-up there as an officer for Vancouver Police, which is what my husband ended up doing. But they do rotating shifts. So you're on day shift for 4, off, swing shift for 4, off for 4, night shift for 4, off for 4. And I said, well, I can't do a counseling program and do that. So I'll step out. I'll step out of policing, finish my degree. I'll go back into it once I've finished it, and I don't have to worry about the rotating schedule as much. And when I finished my degree and started my practice, it was all she wrote. There was no time for me to go back into policing because my practice just took off. And we relocated back to the U.S. because, Vancouver was beautiful, but it's a better place to visit than to live in terms of living expenses and traffic and crowding and that kind of stuff. So we moved back to the U.S., but we stayed in the Pacific Northwest. So I moved over to Oregon, and I still from time to time go, fit enough, I could still go back to the academy if I needed to re-up to here locally, but I just can't find the free time to do that with a full client load and all the work that I'm doing now. So it was never an intent to leave the profession. It was only an intent to add another skill set to be able to do both.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's definitely worked out. And so it's something, right? When you go through an incident and you go to talk to somebody, of course, you want to talk to someone who knows, someone who's been there, someone who really understands. I talk about this incident often. We had something where it was myself, my supervisor at the time, and 2 other people. The county set us up with a counselor. Now, I'm sure that counselor was really good at what he does, but we went in there and the first thing he asked was, so what happened? And we mention it, and then immediately the response is, well, so how does that make you feel? And I remember we looked at each other and we're like, F this. Like,
Yeah.
like this isn't, and like I said, nothing against that person. I'm sure they were great at what they do. It just, the person didn't come from where we come from, and it just, we weren't comfortable. It was just like, let me lay on the table and tell you whatever. And it was just odd. Yeah. So I can sympathize with with the person who tried to pay you for services there in the beginning, because shit, I might have done the same thing. I would have wanted to talk to you because you've been there, what it's about. There's not that I guess kind of that judgment as well, like this person's not going to think I'm weak or anything, because they know what I'm dealing with. They know how I feel.
Yeah, it was just so weird. I was like, why are you bringing my mail? Like, I knew something was up. And that's the other thing that serves me is in this line of work now, is that I'm able to pick up on things. And someone said this to me the other day, is I don't let them get by with anything. If they say something or do something where they're trying to avoid some issue, I pull them right back to it and I go, no. That right there. What's that? What did you just say? What are we doing here? And they're like, damn, I can't get anything by on you. I'm like, no, it is not. And I told them, it is not my job to be complicit with you. It is not my job to go, and how did that make you feel?
Yeah.
Okay. Let me do some, it's not helpful. And again, it's not that I'm just going around challenging people left and right, but there is something to be said for having an active engagement in something and calling BS when something's BS, and being able to detect when someone's doing this maneuver to try to avoid something. So,
yeah. And, also because of the fact that you have that experience as well, it all meshes together, where versus someone who doesn't. And then, the person that they're speaking to, they probably automatically feel like, well, how are you going to tell me how to do my job or think about my job when you've never done the job? For an example, when I left dispatch, I ended up going to the private sector. I became an industry partner with a 911 solutions company here in Indiana. And I was going to different dispatch centers and training them how to do, text for 911 and a few other things. Well, I'm in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and I was at the state post that I had talked to when I was working in dispatch. Well, I get over there and I'm in this basement level with all the dispatchers and call takers. And I told them who I was, but I immediately said, but before that, for 13 and a half years, I was a 911 dispatcher and supervisor on the line. And one person says, I am so glad you said that, because if you were just another tech guy trying to tell us how to do our job, you would not have made it out of here alive. And I started laughing and I went, oh, geez. And I said, well, that's why I say all the time that I'm from dispatch as well. And then you could literally see everyone just, instead of them being here, it was like, all right, it's one of us. Like it was so much easier than, had I been just some tech dude coming in to try to tell them how to do their job.
Yeah. And that's why I use the tagline a lot, cop turned psychologist, because I want that shorthand, like tagline. Hey, I haven't been everywhere you've been or done everything, or seen everything you've done. But I have enough of that base, just, I have the potential to understand better.
Right. Exactly. And so I want to jump into, as we're getting towards the end of this episode. I knew this was going to be one of those where we're just scratching the surface. There's so much to talk about here, but I want to get to your book here really quick and just kind of highlight on a couple pieces here before we go into the wrap up. So the book is Increasing Resilience in Police and Emergency Personnel. And one of the parts that I was really focusing on, so this is chapter 3 now. For those who are watching and listening, if you have this book as well, if not, please make sure to check it out and read up on it. But chapter 3 talks about secondary traumatic stress. and it says uncomplicated strategies for complex trauma. Now,
Yeah.
there's STS, which is the secondary traumatic stress, and then
Yeah.
versus burnout. So in the book, it kind of talks about how, people might get confused with one being the same as the other. What are some of those differences?
Yeah, I mean, one's emotion and one's cognitive. So
Mhm.
secondary traumatic stress is an emotional, where it's secondary to trauma. So someone else's traumatization, someone else's suffering, someone else's misery. And so you start to feel some of that trauma of theirs, right? Secondarily. And because, it's hard to see a dead kid or hear the wailing of a parent that's found a dead kid, right? So you just feel like this just pulling on your heart, and can traumatize you, emotionally, right? And which is physical, because we know post-traumatic stress disorder is really an injury. And so that's what secondary traumatic stress is. Burnout is more cynicism and exhaustion. And so it's more cognitive insofar as you're just like, I don't feel like I have the resources I need to do my job, whether it's staffing or the right equipment or that kind of stuff. And so you start to feel this sense of not being effective anymore and just being tired because you just don't feel effective. And so you can have both. You can be, cynical and exhausted from feeling like you don't get appreciation or you don't have equipment or those kinds of things, and be traumatized by your constant exposure to the suffering of other people. You can have both. And in fact, I'd say each one is going to exacerbate the other, but they are two different concepts. Mm-hmm. And post-traumatic stress and secondary traumatic stress, to put those two side by side, because I mentioned post-traumatic stress being an injury, there really isn't a difference between post-traumatic stress and secondary traumatic stress in terms of the symptoms. And then we know from the most recent diagnosis or diagnostic criteria for post-traumatic stress that typically it's a trauma that's occurred to you. But in the most recent edition of the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, basically the diagnosis manual, is that it lists first responders' exposure to the suffering of others. So basically, that secondary traumatic stress is enough to be a trauma to you because of the chronicity of it, because of the intimacy of it. I mean, you can't, as a dispatcher, you can't not feel, the anguish of a parent that's like, they're not breathing. They're not breathing. Oh my God, what is happening, right? Or I can't stop them from doing whatever it is they're doing. It's really hard to not feel that, or feel the effects of that, if not in the moment, afterwards.
Yeah. And man, exactly. There's just reading a lot of this stuff here, so it says, like, basically the way you were saying, effects, and this is just from the book that I pulled it out here, but effects of STS are psychological, physiological, behavioral, and spiritual. And some of the parts that I was looking at, talking about the physiological part of it, or things that I was dealing with. Like, there are some parts in there where it's talking about gastrointestinal issues that people end up having. And I was sitting there reading that, and it was one of those things where, you see a meme and it says something and then it says, read that again, or people put read that again, or say it louder for those in the back. I had to read it again because I thought, hell no, like, for real? Like, this, all that stress that I was dealing with was affecting me that much. And then, just kind of thinking back, yeah, that is stuff that I was dealing with as well. And it's just crazy to think.
Yeah, and it is an injury. I mean, what happens to the body happens to the brain. What happens to the brain happens to the body. They're not, the brain is within the body, right? So you're going to have, and a lot of times, they call it having issues in your tissues. You're going to have backaches, headaches, stomach aches, that kind of stuff, right? Because it's making you, physically ill.
Yeah, another thing that was in there that really really hit home for me as well was so there's a part in there where it's talking about kind of, I guess, finding a little bit of time for yourself to basically decompress.
Hmm.
how do people do this? One way is taking the longer way home, which I know I did a lot at times, or I would just listen to music. Sometimes I would have to watch out though, because it would be I worked 12 hours, so it was 4:30 in the afternoon to 4:30 in the morning. And what I had to start doing was around 3:30 or so, I would either have a cup of coffee or have an energy drink, because it would be so, and I wouldn't notice it in the beginning, but I would be so exhausted from the amount of calls and everything that was going
Hmm.
on, that when I finally got to the car and everything just, this adrenaline dump, I would either go into tunnel vision, where I would eventually get to a portion of my travel home and wonder, how the hell did I get this far?
Hmm.
That's
Hmm.
scary. Or I would start kind of dozing off and I would hit those rumble strips. So I would have to drink something in order
Hmm.
to stay awake. But then I'm screwing myself, because as soon as I get home, I can't sleep and I have to go
Yeah.
to work later on. So there was those types of things. And I mentioned this to you in the beginning as well, before we started recording, that I had done something that said, um, if I could tell you one thing about the job, it would be this. And a couple of people ended up putting something out there that's kind of the same, the way you have it written in the book, that some people were saying that I just need some time when I get home
Hmm.
with silence. And
Hmm.
it's I guess it's telling family that it's just being direct, but a lot of times people don't want to be direct, because they either don't want to either even have that conversation, or they don't want to come off as as a jerk, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. And the thing is in dispatch, especially on a busy shift,
Hmm.
you're overstimulated. Radio traffic, phones, other people, radio traffic of people in pods beside you, blinking lights, dings, the computers and this kind of stuff, the CAD system. And so you are overstimulated. And so your nervous system is frayed. It's just like if I just kept rubbing on my hand here and I did this for 12 hours, and then I get a moment where like, oh, okay, good. And then you get home and then it's more of that. You're like, oh
Hmm.
my God, I don't have any skin left, right? It's been rubbed on for 12 hours, but the family members haven't seen you. And God, it's horrible if you come home and they're like, yeah, whatever. And they're indifferent to you coming home. So that's a whole other host of problems. So it's not that them coming to talk to you or, engage you in some way in itself is a problem, but they need to understand you're frayed. Your nervous system is frayed. You need some downtime to let that's been kind of repeatedly, I don't know, agitated or used needs a breather, right? And so that 20-minute, 30-minute, hey, just if you can let me have this downtime where I just veg and I'm lowering my stimulation. Maybe I'm even slowing my breathing down, or I'm doing something else, some other kind of exercises or something where I'm actually able to discharge some of this energy that's kind of caught up in this nervous system that's just been increasingly pumped into. I'll be better when we come together rather than being still in that agitated state, still in that frayed state. But,
Yeah, thinking back, I wish that I would have just said something like that, because I mean, my wife doesn't come from public safety or anything, and none of my family does. Um, And so it was hard for me. Like I didn't really have someone to talk to. And of course, during that time as well, we didn't talk about things in dispatch. There was this
mhm,
stigma where nobody wanted to look weak. Nobody wanted to think that they couldn't handle it. So it was a lot of stuff that I was holding in. And I remember I would go home and it was hard to shut it off, because
mhm,
I had my dispatch here going all the time. My wife or my kid is just, they're talking to me, and I'm there physically, partially mentally, because I can hear the TV, I can
yeah,
hear what's going on outside, I can smell dinner, all of this stuff is going on, and then I go, right back to who's talking to me, and they're like, "Are you paying attention?" And I would repeat everything that they said, but it
mm,
was hard to shut it off.
mhm. Yeah, and I think it needs to be an explicit conversation with your people to
Yeah.
say, it's not that I don't want to engage with you. It's not that I am not interested in what you're saying, but this is what I need to get there. Right. And here's what I need from you to help me stay accountable. So if I take that time to myself and I don't actually do something that's restorative, I just start looking online, doing this. And then 20 minutes later, 30 minutes later, I'm just as agitated because I'm still keeping myself overstimulated.
Yeah.
Then I'm asking you to hold up a mirror to me to say, you're not using that time as you intended. You're not actually taking care of yourself. And again, it's not to get you in trouble, but rather to keep you with that intentionality of trying to de-stress yourself, decompress yourself, not decompose doing this, with your computer or your phone or what have you. And so I think it's important to be explicit about what you need. Both partners, everybody in there. I think a lot of times we're not as vocal about that as we could be, and it leaves people with the guessing game, thinking, oh well, they seem to have energy when they can talk to people at work, but they don't have energy to talk to me.
Right. Yeah. And then issues arise from there. I had kind of this transition when I started to really realize and dissect a lot of stuff that I was going through, where, it went from just not talking to then talking. But also when I would get home that early in the morning, and even in like a blizzard, I would shovel out away on my deck to my grill. And my decompression would be to have a cold one outside, but also while I'm grilling a steak, so I could eat steak and eggs at like 5 a.m. But then I went from that transition to when I got home later on and really got into things. I would get home and do yoga and meditate and then go to sleep. So I went from drinking and having steak and eggs to something completely different. It was something that I never thought I would have gotten into, but there was a lot of change that I ended up doing. So, I mean, it ultimately ended up being good. So as we get into this, the wrap up of this episode, this hour went by fast. Holy crap. And like I said, there's so much more that we could talk about. And I hope to have you on again to talk more about all of this. What are some tips, I guess, for those who are watching, those who are listening, as we talk about resilience, to be resilient? What are some tips? What are some things that people can do, when we're talking about this topic of resilience? How can people be more resilient in what it is that they do? And I guess just in the response to this job.
Yeah. And resilience is really a practice, and when I teach resilience, I ask the question of the group, it's a small group exercise. Can you learn to be resilient, or is it a characteristic you have? If you can learn to be resilient, where do you learn it from? If it's a characteristic you have, what is the said characteristic? And I give them about 20 minutes to entertain these two questions. And we come back pretty consistently that there's one part of being resilient that has some temperament, has some, kind of inborn characteristics, being more flexible or being more open or curious and willing to try new things and this kind of stuff, being more positive. But then there's also the school of hard knocks, where you actually learn to do things to make yourself resilient, where you seek out models of resilience and say, okay, how are they maintaining a good attitude despite the world that we live in, and what relationships do I really need to be filling up, and how am I taking care of my body? So it distills down to a lot, and I'm not sure how much I can get into it in the time that we have left here, but there's 3 main categories of, that you can kind of go down. One is building your health. So I know it seems kind of like a one-off thing to exercise or do yoga or meditate or those kinds of things. But when you work on your physical health, it translates a calm body, which you become calm through exercise and yoga and meditation, equals a calm mind, right? You can't have a calm mind if you don't have a calm body, and you can't have a calm body if you're not taking care of it. And that's just, for every, this is the neuroscience stuff, for every message that your brain sends down to your body that makes you sick to your stomach, there's 9 more coming from your body up to your brain. So 9 more from your body to your brain. So when you exercise, you secrete brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is a fancy way of saying you grow neurons in your brain. So your cognitive functioning, your decision making, those kinds of things, your memory is going to be improved upon. So getting exercise, daily if possible, but at least 30 minutes 3 times a day, twice as effective as Zoloft in research in terms of improving mood. Close to twice. It's 90% of people improve with exercise, 45% or 50% with Zoloft. Your spiritual health, if that's part of it, and that could be relating to religion, it could be relating to going into nature. That's another thing, going near things that are blue and green. Blue, bodies of water; green, trees, bushes, grass, this kind of stuff. These are home to our body. Our bodies are most calm when we're near water or trees or anything blue or green. You can't go frolicking out in the woods all the time, having it as a screensaver, having it on your phone, revisiting vacation photos, thinking about it, just sitting and imagining being in those places and remembering positive things. Your relationships, pouring into your relationships every day. What can I do to improve my relationship at home, with my kid, with my significant other, with my coworkers, with my community? Trying to find ways to pour into those, because you don't want to try to build those when you need them, because that's too late. You need to be, investing in those all along, because if you have a hard time, you're going to need to make a withdrawal from those, and you can't if you've not been investing in it. And then the third is your mindset, and tons and tons of resilience research states that it is your mindset, your attitude about adversity, that is going to make a really big difference. So you can have a really negative mindset and say, everybody's out to get us, this is terrible, the world is stupid, it's going to hell in a handbasket, people are morons, and I'm just a shit show. And all of that's going to be a self-fulfilling prophecy, because that's all you're going to see. It's, you have this cognitive bias, you're going to see that. And then we become fused with our thoughts and whatever thought we have. So we just automatically believe that they're true because we had the thought. So if we can be more curious and ask what else is there, and we actually look for the good in people, and we look for the good in the world, and we look for the strengths in ourselves, and we do those things on a regular basis, we're going to be more resilient, because whatever you look for becomes bigger, becomes magnified. And this isn't about wishful thinking and pretending that there isn't injustice in the world or cruelty or violence, but noticing what else is out there. So really expanding what you're looking at. And it's not to say that you're not suffering or that you're not hurting or your relationship isn't, but also expanding what else is there about yourself. What other values are you living by? What other way are you slightly making some improvement? And so all of these things are actions, as you can notice. They're actions you have to take in each of these domains that will incrementally move you towards being more resilient. But just like a shower, you don't just do it once. You got to keep doing it over and over and over it again for it to maintain its effectiveness.
Well, that is excellent. And like I said, I need to have you on again, because this was an excellent conversation, and there is so much more that we can get into. But before I let you go here, how can people find out more about you? Everything that you do, email, social media, how can people find out more?
Well, apparently it's pretty easy, because I used to have I had a client creep me. FirstResponderPsychology.com is my website, and that's where you can order a copy of my book. It's on Amazon as well if you prefer to go that route. They're going to be faster in terms of delivery, but you won't get a signed copy if you order from my website. I'll sign the copy. I'll make it out to whoever you want it made out to. And I think I actually beat Amazon's price right now. It just depends on what promo they're running. So FirstResponderPsychology.com. And then if you look on the training link there, it has some of the trainings that I'm doing, but training is a large component of what I do these days. And so I can't possibly add every time I have a training that I'm doing. And it doesn't make sense to do it, because a lot of them, this agency's hired me for their employees, or that agency's hired me. So it wouldn't make sense for everybody else to know where I'm going, because they can go, oh, great, she's going to train like Oswego today, but we don't get to go. So that's, I mean, and I have a Facebook page, First Responder Psychology, and I'm on LinkedIn and those kinds of things. And so, don't get on Twitter much because I don't find it adds much. I find it mostly just kind of takes away from the value of my life. But so, yeah.
All right. Well, excellent. Thank you, Stephanie, so much for being on once again. And I will be right back here with you. And for those who are watching, if you have any comments, questions, or you ever want to be a guest on the show, you can email us. And that is going to be wttpodcast@gmail.com. You can follow us on Twitter. That is @91podcast. You can like us on Facebook. That is facebook.com/Within the Trenches podcast. This episode has been sponsored by InDigital as well as Rapid Deploy. And if you're looking for any bonus content, you can check us out, patreon.com/WTT podcast. You can see this episode on Facebook as well as YouTube. And for the audio version, you can listen 24/7 on Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, your favorite podcasting app, and withinthetrenches.net. And once again, thank you, patrons, and thank you all for your support through just all of this. Thank you so very much, and we'll see you in the next one. Have a good one, everyone.